And joining us now are CBS News legal analyst Jeff Glor and Alpha Group CEO Frank Shea, a former New York City homicide detective. Gentlemen, good morning to both of you.
Hey, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff. Frank, let me start with you. Did they go too far?
I would say that from what I've read, the early reports were that there were two individual shootings. One at the, as the gunman fled, and apparently one officer fired while the fleeing suspect had the gun in his hand. Then you have the second set of circumstances where he was attempting to carjack a vehicle, and the vehicle apparently left the scene, and while driving away, it was then observed by 4 officers in 2 teams, and then they apparently fired on the car. Right. As far as going too far, I think the investigation will turn up whether they did or not, and that is going to be dependent on, number one, whether or not the officers were aware that there were hostages in the car.
Right. Jack, let's talk about rules in cases like this. Are there rules that the police officers follow?
That's the hard thing, Jeff. When you say, did they go too far, what's the definition of too far?
Right.
Police officers and departments have gotten much better in the last decade or so. I think Frank has seen this in terms of saying, let's have some policies. Let's give guidance to the police officers that are out there on the street. But everybody realizes you can't have a hard and fast rule because the facts in each situation change. You know, when they look at this, they'll look at the police officers and they'll say, okay, was there criminal responsibility here? Was there civil responsibility? Was there departmental? But again, the standards are what was reasonable under the circumstances. But even if it turns out that their assumptions were wrong, let's say that this person didn't have a weapon. We know he did. Even if it turns out their assumptions were wrong, if it was reasonable under the circumstances, then usually they'll say, okay, we're not looking at any criminal responsibility for the law enforcement officer.
Here's the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office policy. They prohibit officers from firing at a moving vehicle other than as a last resort to prevent death or great bodily harm, as a last resort to prevent the escape of a felon who might pose an imminent threat, or when authorized by a watch commander. Are these the uniform rules?
Well, in New York City, we'll use New York City as one example. It's forbidden to fire at a moving vehicle. That's one situation. But in Jacksonville, they do have the fleeing felon and the safety of any individuals that may be injured in his flight. Now, a police officer has 1 to 2 seconds to make a decision.
Yeah, we should mention these happen very, very quickly.
You know, and a split second can change the lives of many people, not only the people that are being shot at, but also the police officer's life. So a situation like this is a split-second decision, and once again, the officer in making that decision has to determine whether or not he's within the guidelines and if the person's going to be a threat to others.
Jack, with 30 seconds left here, where does this case go moving forward? You
know, I think what happens now, Jeff, is that the law enforcement people will be looked at by the prosecutor's office to see whether or not their actions were reasonable under the circumstances. The department's going to take a good, hard look to see whether they followed the departmental policies. And you may well have somebody on the outside, family members, lawyers for family members, taking a look whether there's any civil responsibility here. They could walk away with a determination that saying, even though it was tragic, it was entirely appropriate under the circumstances, or somebody might say there were some problems here.
All right, Jeff Glor and Frank Shea, appreciate both your time this morning.
Jeff,
Thank you very much.
A lot happens early on The Early Show, weekday mornings on CBS.